There have been many crises lately in the US. One of those is, of course, the so called housing crisis. To break it down quite simply, the costs of owning or renting a dwelling place is skyrocketing in the US to the point where it's completely unaffordable to many people. Every house you see on the market is often sold for tens of thousands over asking price, and apartment rents are also rising constantly. This, of course, leads to the questions: what caused this crisis, and how can we solve it? This video will examine those questions from a bigger picture framework, then look at a specific example to see this in action. So, to begin, what do Americans think of when we think of housing? We think that everyone has to own their own house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, free from the interference of others. Many people don't think of things like apartments as the desirable standard because we're obsessed with the idea that we have to own our own home. Nothing else will satisfy us. It was an idea that even I had for most of my life until I went to study abroad in Italy. I was participating in a homestay program, and I thought that I would be staying in, well, a house. But to my surprise, I was staying in an apartment in the city with a family, which of course was the norm for them. They were perfectly able to have a family life in the city without having to spend hundreds of thousands on a massive suburban house. This provoked many thoughts for me at the time. Of course, there are pros to having your own house, I won't deny that, but people don't consider the many cons as well. For one, the prices are so ridiculously bloated right now, and you need to make a huge commitment financially just to get into one. That's if you even get approved for a mortgage, which good luck with that. But there's also the plethora of chores you're subject to, like lawn work, and you're on the hook for any appliance that breaks. How many times I hear my relatives who are homeowners complain about spending thousands on new appliances or home services. It's kind of sad. Not to mention that you're far away from about every service that you would have if you lived in the city. This lifestyle and viewpoint, it seems, are finally catching up to us in the US. Many people are realizing that it's simply unsustainable and leads to so many financial pitfalls that we just can't handle anymore. It's a sad reality that all the crises we're facing lately is a result of our flawed ways of living. So now it's time to adapt to the 21st century and realize what we're doing wrong. The housing crisis in its barest form comes down to a problem of supply and demand. There is too much demand and not enough supply. This is evident in the fact that people are willing to pay tens of thousands over asking price for housing. The more housing there is, the less people would be inclined to even consider doing that. For example, in Minneapolis, the city had only built 64,000 homes since 2010, while they added 83,000 households. Those numbers display the problem at hand in a simple way. So before getting into the real-world example, I want to display this in a way that's easy to understand. Let's think about it this way. How long does it take to build a single-family home? According to a 2019 US Census Bureau report, around 7 months. Now, how long does it take to build an apartment complex? It seems to be anywhere from 10 to 14 months. This, of course, can vary on how big or small it is. So in a span of anywhere from 3 to 7 extra months, several times as much housing can be provided. So it seems clear that if we focused on building multifamily dwellings as opposed to single-family homes, we could create much more housing in an exponentially quicker fashion, which of course would create more supply and alleviate the market shortage faster. Now, this is all nice in theory, but what are we doing about it in the real world? To no surprise, the example I want to look at is the city of Minneapolis. A few years ago, the city passed what they called their 2040 plan, which is a vision for the city by the year 2040 that tackles many fronts. One of them is their goal to abolish single-family zoning. To give a brief overview, areas are zoned so that only certain types of developments can be built on them. There's residential zoning, commercial zoning, etc. The problem in America is that so much area is zoned for only single-family detached housing and allows for nothing else. In Minneapolis in particular, nearly 70% of land was zoned this way. If developers are forced then to only build single-family homes, you have a snail-like progression towards providing housing which, according to the examples above, clearly isn't enough. The three main arguments the city provided for their 2040 plan was to address the housing affordability crisis, to reduce economic and racial segregation, and to address climate change. The single-family zoning policies in Minneapolis are rooted in racism and segregation, and those practices have created remarkable inequality, strife, and just bad cities overall. I and many others have been critical of the US car centric infrastructure lately, and single family zoning is one of the main reasons why it's so bad in the first place. If everyone has to own their own home that takes up a lot of space, and the only way you can build is outward, not upward, you create an abundant amount of sprawl, which ends up requiring car travel, creating traffic, pollution, higher road maintenance costs. I could go on for a while. The 2040 plan recognizes that these policies have made our cities bad and outlines several larger goals that would make the city a better place in general, such as promoting bike-friendly infrastructure, eliminating parking minimums, promoting development along transit lines, among others. There is, of course, resistance to this movement and this plan in particular. The people who oppose such shifts in development are referred to as NIMBYs, not in my backyards, which I just picture as one of those bitter old people that you'd make fun of as a kid for yelling at young people. But anyway, one of their major concerns is a reduction in their property value that they've spent copious amounts of money on throughout their lifetime. This concern is examined in a study which examines the early effects of the 2040 plan in Minneapolis and finds that people's property values actually tend to increase with the abolition of single-family zoning. I'm going to post all the studies and articles I found about this in the description if you're still skeptical if this is the right way forward. The data seems pretty clear that this is the best way to fight the ongoing housing crisis and create better, more livable cities. The more we share this and explain it to people, the more we can actually get out of this crisis instead of just prolonging it. But sadly, people still aren't educated enough about it. A judge just recently blocked the implementation of the 2040 plan because of a lawsuit from a group citing unaddressed environmental concerns. Yeah, because building sprawling car-dependent suburbias is more concerning for the environment than promoting car-free, denser multifamily housing.